In a small dusty town, a young woman was dragged out by her mother-in-law and sold for just $1, all because she couldn't have children. Everyone watched, but no one helped. She thought that was the end of her story. But then a quiet man showed up holding twin babies in his arms. He didn't say much, just offered her a chance to come with him. She had no idea that saying yes would lead to something she never thought she'd have again. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The crowd gathered in the mud-soaked square like vultures, huddled beneath gray skies that spat drizzle and shame, murmuring and pointing as the woman in the white cotton dress stood trembling on the auction block, barefoot, rain-drenched, and hollow-eyed, her hands clasped in front of her as if prayer might still save her. But nothing had saved her before, not when she was dragged from her home by her mother-in-law, not when her husband of 5 years stood silent as a corpse, while his mother screamed that Eleanor was cursed, barren, useless, a shame on the family name, and not when the town's doctor secretly told her that it wasn't her body but Clayton's that carried the emptiness, a truth too dangerous for a woman to speak aloud. So Eleanor endured in silence, enduring glares at church, whispers at the general store, loneliness in her own bed where her husband rolled away from her as if her skin were made of failure. And then the day came when Bertha snapped, her eyes wild with the desperation of someone who had no control left but still craved power. And she dragged Eleanor like livestock to the village square, climbed the platform, shoved her forward and screamed to the crowd, $1, just $1 for this barren girl who can't even carry seed like a proper wife. And while Eleanor stood still, face burning with a mix of rage and resignation, the townsfolk said nothing, just watched. Farmers, wives, children, all part of the same world that let women be shamed and sold when they failed to give sons. And even then she might have stood there until the sky cracked open if not for the sound of boots in mud, heavy and slow, and the sight of a man on horseback soaked in dust and rain, cradling 2 infants, one on each arm, their heads wrapped in cloth against the wind. And he didn't speak to Bertha, didn't look at the crowd, only at Eleanor, and something in his eyes wasn't pity, it was recognition. Like he saw her not as broken but as someone who'd been broken and was still standing. And Bertha snarled, "You want her? Fine. $1's the price. Don't say I didn't warn you. She'll give you nothing but silence and sorrow." But the man reached into his coat, dropped a silver coin at Bertha's feet without looking, and said softly, "I didn't come for what she can give. I came because I know what she's already given." And as he handed the twins up to her, Eleanor hesitated, confused. But the girl in the blue cloth opened her eyes and smiled, toothless and pure. And Eleanor's hands moved without thinking, holding them close like she'd done it all her life. And he said, "Their mother died last winter. Fever took her fast. I tried to stop it, but you were the one who brought the herbs, weren't you? The night rider who left medicine on the cabin porch?" And Eleanor's breath caught, remembering the frostbitten ride across miles with nothing but instinct and sorrow guiding her, never knowing who'd lived or died. But he knew. And now he stood before her, offering not charity, but purpose. And as he turned to lead her off the platform, Bertha shrieked, "You're taking my son's wife!" And the man stopped, turned, eyes like steel sharpened in grief. "Your son left her to rot, and now you'll live with what you did. Because when those children say mama, they won't be talking about the woman who sold her for a coin." And the silence that followed was a death knell to Bertha's cruelty. And Eleanor stepped off the platform barefoot, cradling life in her arms for the first time, following a stranger into a future where she had nothing and everything to lose. and the road was rough, the land unforgiving, the twins often sick or screaming in the night. But the cabin he brought her to was warm, walls patched by care, and each time she rocked the babies to sleep or wiped their runny noses, she felt something bloom in the hollows where hope had once lived. And in him, in Thomas, she saw a man wounded by love lost, but gentle in his grief, who never touched her without consent, never demanded a word, but simply let her exist, until one day when a neighbor mocked him for taking in a ruined woman, and Eleanor stepped in front of Thomas, voice strong for the first time in years, saying, "I'd rather be ruined and kind than whole and cruel." And the neighbor shrank like smoke. And that night, as Thomas stacked wood in silence, she touched his arm and asked, "Do you ever feel the ghosts are louder than the living?" And he nodded, eyes shining. And for the first time, they wept together, not out of pain, but out of release. And seasons passed. The twins learned to walk, and Eleanor learned to speak her mind. And one day, as she sat in the field with the girl on her lap, and the boy in the dirt beside her, Thomas knelt before her, holding a ring carved from deer antler, whispering, "You were never mine to take, but I'd give my name if you ever wanted it." And she said nothing at first, just held the twins tighter, then nodded, not out of obligation but out of choice. And their union wasn't perfect. Sometimes she woke screaming from old nightmares. Sometimes he stared too long at the fire, remembering a wife he buried in frozen earth. But they stitched their lives together with quiet acts of devotion. And when word reached town that Bertha had taken ill, dying alone in the house she once ruled, Eleanor rode back not out of revenge but duty, stood in the doorway of that dark, crumbling farmhouse, and found Bertha gaunt, coughing, alone, and before she could speak, the old woman croaked, "I did what I thought was right." And Eleanor, with no rage left in her, only said, "Then die knowing you were wrong," and placed a bowl of warm soup on the bedside, leaving her to her fate, and rode home into a storm that couldn't touch her anymore, because home was no longer a prison. It was a hearth, a family, a man who saw her not as broken but unbowed. And years later, when the twins stood tall, and Eleanor's hair turned silver at the edges, a child from another tragedy was left at their doorstep, and without hesitation she brought the girl inside, wrapped her in wool and whispered, "You're safe now," because Eleanor had been sold, discarded, humiliated, but she had not been destroyed. And the woman once auctioned for $1 became the one who saved generations, not by bearing children but by raising them, not by being chosen but by choosing herself again and again. And every scar she bore told a story, not of defeat, but survival sharpened into mercy. And when she died, decades later, the town named a school after her, not because of her womb, but because of her will, and no one ever spoke Bertha's name again.